Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister. Are you embarrassed to be a Christian, or are you embarrassed to admit that you're a Christian in front of others? You're not alone. Stick around because this will be helpful to you as we talk about hypocrisy, the public representation of the church, but then the importance of being able to speak about Christianity in plain speech, particularly for those who don't have any real familiarity with it in the first place. As always, like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support the work that we do, you can do that by going to www.toltogether.com.
And we're going to talk about being embarrassed about being a Christian, which is obviously not comfortable territory for anybody to think through. And you might be saying, I am a bold proclaimer of the gospel. I'm not embarrassed of my faith. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. You've got that Romans 1:16 verse in your mind. You're ready to go. But here's the thing, Cameron. I think as Christianity bubbles up into cultural, political, all sorts of other areas and categories of our lives, we're going to continue to find ourselves as a perennial problem, perennial issue of saying, here's somebody who's talking publicly about Christianity, who's giving a certain perspective of Christianity that I want to have nothing to do with. Therefore, that person does not represent me or what it is that I believe. And I would rather not be identified with that. And so you're not embarrassed of your faith, but you might be embarrassed of a particular manifestation or articulation of it and just start to feel like, you know what, I'm going to hold back publicly on my affiliation with Christianity unless I can be the one who very clearly for 2 hours can sit down and to describe to somebody, this is exactly what I believe, but not like this person and not like this person. And I don't believe that, but I do believe this and unlike that. And I'm not affiliated with that. And this person says this, but I'm not really like that. And this person is popular and is on this podcast. And the New York Times says this, but that's not me. Like, it's just the death of a trillion qualifications in order for you to articulate what it is that you actually believed contra what you think might be a flippant, flamboyant, overly politicized, or morally skewed version and vision of what you actually hold to be true as a Christian. And it just leaves you with a help us.
What do you think is the overwhelming kind of stereotype of Christians nowadays? It's changed. It changes with the decades. So in the not too distant past, the 1940s, let's say roughly from probably I'm talking about relatively modern times. So 20s to the 50s, Christianity had a reputation as being good for society. Even if you weren't a Christian, you assumed Christians, they're morally upstanding citizens and they make positive contributions. I'd say overwhelmingly that is not the case now. But how would you say specifically people would characterize it now? You say Christian, and what are the associations that come to mind for somebody who's not a believer? I've got my
So
own.
you,
I mean, I can throw some out
okay,
there, but
so let me give you. I can't. So we can talk historically what we think might have been the case. Let's just use our own lives. So you had, both of us were young people through the new atheist. All
mhm,
religions are filled with idiots. Like you
yeah.
have to be knuckle
So
dragging fools.
stupid. Yep.
Christians are stupid. So that was
Yep.
certainly a predominant narrative for an extended period of time. And I think that's mainly faded. You can still find that. Go read the comments on a Sam Harris YouTube video. I mean, it's still out there, but it doesn't have
Sure.
its cultural prominence in the same way that perhaps a vision of Christianity as a politically successful system now
Mhm.
is part of the broader conversation. And so it still is
Yeah.
important for politicians to give some sort of a nod, or, and I think this is a Tom Holland error, not error, era, um, Christianity of saying
Yeah.
it brings stability and upholds certain values of liberty and freedom and responsibility and
Your bulwark. Yeah.
consequence. And it is a bulwark. It's a foundational element in which it um, supports the framing of the world that we enjoy at this moment.
Mhm.
That's the positive version of that. With the everybody who's not that and doesn't appreciate that version, just sees it like a heavy-handed hammer that is here to squash
Yeah.
all of the fun and to throw itself in the path of progress and knock the utopian vision
Yep.
that we see progressive ideology and technology leading us into. So it's either the bulwark or it's either the safety rails and iron core concrete foundation below us, or it's the anvil on our head that's trying to squish us. But those are both framed in a political vision of what Christianity is.
I think that's a thoughtful answer. Yes, in the past it was, yeah. If in the past it was Christians were stupid, now for some it's Christians are dangerous. If you take the negative side of that, if you think,
Mhm.
yeah,
Well, you either
if you
have
look at
remove
somebody like,
Christianity and it's dangerous to culture, or insert
mhm,
Christianity and it's dangerous to the individual.
right. So, yeah, some people look at a Doug Wilson, they think, "Hey, this guy has some serious answers, and here's a positive, constructive direction that we need." Others look at him and say, "This is theocracy. This is extremely dangerous. This is
We've been trying to
terrifying."
get away from this for a long time. Yeah.
But you use the word political. That's an important one. So I do think that in recent years, I mean, we live in a largely our public spaces are largely secular. We're I mean, there's a growing openness to spirituality and religion. So I'm using secular in a carefully qualified sense. I just mean in our areas of public debate and our the sort of the public square, it still styles itself, or at least tries to aim for the ideal of a kind of neutral space. Now, I mean, whether that's even possible or not is another question, but that's how it styles itself. So in that space, every we talk about how everything's politicized nowadays. Well, yeah, because politics kind of becomes the final place that you go to
Yeah.
get stuff done.
It's the lowest common
And so
denominator. It's the only thing
it's
we
the
still
lowest
all have
common
in
denominator.
common.
Correct. Right. So with that as your context, it makes sense that Christianity today is highly politicized because everything is highly politicized. So that's what's happening. Christianity still plays a major role in public life in North America. It played a major role in the past, so naturally it's going to be highly politicized.
Well, there's an
So those
easy
are some of
solution to
those.
this.
What's that?
You just deny that the other category exists. So,
Mm,
regardless of
mhm.
what flavor of Christian you're representing here, or where you lie on the political spectrum, you can just deny that there are Christians in any other categories. Um, I've taught a class before where like the class could not believe that historically there were Christians who were Democrats. Like it wasn't even a category that registered in their frame of reference that
Right.
that was a real thing.
I've
Um,
heard that before too. Yeah.
so you don't have to engage with a sense of like how do we figure this out, or do we have a deeper common identity here. It's just and
Right.
it's super easy to not engage with people who see the world different. Like if you don't like what the New York
Of
Times says
course.
about Christianity, don't read the New York Times. Easy. And if you like about fill in the blank of who you do think represents it well, your YouTube feed will be filled up with that, and you don't have to worry about it. So I think this is a unique challenge for people who are trying to think missionally and read broadly and understand the culture, and who just engage with non-Christians on a daily basis, who would look at your aunt, as lovely as she is, like she had three eyeballs because she's a
Mhm.
Christian.
So just a little bit of perspective here. It's a much more serious kind of issue to deal with when it involves your faith and your convictions, but this is something that happens in other areas of life as well. So when you're a part of when you are an ambassador of a certain group or community. So if there's an instance of police brutality, for instance, that makes the news, if there's a kind of a media focus on police brutality, as there has been in the past few years. I had several friends who were in law enforcement. I'm sure many of you listening, whether you're in law enforcement or know people who are, they would tell you that practically the outcome of that makes their job very difficult on the ground. They may
Mm-hmm.
be, very good at their jobs, and they may be very responsible, and they may be trying to be as just and fair as they can, but the public perception is colored because they are, when they put on that uniform, representatives of that group. Same is true of soldiers. If there's a military scandal or something like that, same is true of athletes or something like
But
like
even like
that.
small
Whether if
companies
you're a football
or
player.
local There's just a guy at my
Yes.
house. He's like, I don't like to tell people I work for the state road. I'm like, what? You like build roads and bridges? And he's like, yeah, but people are always mad at us, so I just don't say that I work for the state. I mean that's not
See?
a that's not a
Sound familiar?
politically
Yeah.
that's not a
Right.
deeply controversial category. Like most people would be happy
Right.
that there's somebody who plows the snow off your road and removes the dead animals and like paints lines on the road. Like even within that, there are times in which we feel like we identify with the public mistakes of other people, and so we just pull back.
So I'm trying to say that to also just try to if some of you are sitting there feeling guilty, I'm trying to help you not feel guilty and just say and try to paint this in a compassionate light. Let's say if you're a pastor and let's say you're on an airplane, you're traveling to some pastor's conference and it's a regular, news week, which means there have been some notable horrible scandals involving Christian leaders and it's on, everybody's talking about it, lots of political stuff involving the president, and you happen to be seated next to somebody on a plane. This person turns to you and starts talking, and you make some small talk, and yeah, and then this person starts going on and on about the absolute outrageousness of some of these Christian figures and all of that, and then says, "Oh, by the way, so what do you do?" If you're hesitant or if you choose to say to give some sort of a evasive answer, these are the very real practical circumstances where I mean I'm not going to fault you for that. We all understand. We've all been in these positions. I've been in this position plenty of so often on an airplane thinking, okay, if I answer what I do here, this is going to I better put my it's not that I have to defend or anything like that. It's just the whole dynamic's gonna change now, and I have to and it's gonna there's gonna be a lot more work involved just in the sense that I'm gonna have to
So that's it though.
carry
That's
this conversation a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you put the finger. It's the amount of work. So you're going to run
Mhm.
into this if you haven't already. You're working on something in the kitchen around the house, and one of your kids runs up to you and says, um, "Explain World War II to me." Um, you're like, "Oh
Mhm.
man!" Like there's because on one hand
One thing
you
led to another, and
one day let's do another. Yeah. So there's a sense in which you're like, "Oh, the amount of work that has to be done in a short amount of time in order to do justice to this topic," because they have no other frame of reference of
yep.
geopolitics or anything, you're like, wow, this is a to do this well is a 3-hour conversation. Here, watch this YouTube video.
Mhm.
On the
Mhm.
flip side, you probably
Yeah.
do need to have a a short summary and understanding of that you could articulate. But we're living in a time now that is post Christian enough outside of the Christian bubbles that the person that you sit to who really doesn't know another Christian and doesn't have enough of the supporting background details and amounts of information that would be needed in order for you to even explain what your denomination is, why there are denominations, what you mean by certain words. Um, I had
Yep.
a year or so back. I had a phenomenal conversation with a young guy. Where's that flying? I forget. Atlanta to Pennsylvania somewhere, I think. Anyway, and it was a really, really deep spiritual conversation, and I used zero Christian words. We talked about salvation and forgiveness and redemption and reconciliation and fullness of life, peace in our relationships and with God. But he had no, and he was an open book, super curious, very, but I mean, we're talking zero, like the language was not there. You couldn't be like, well, like you know what Psalm 23 says. No, you didn't know there was a psalm or that
Yeah.
they're 20 or even 20. And so it's that kind of thing that I feel like we're living in this frustration of in order for me to have this conversation well, I have to start so
Mhm.
far back and do so much work in order to justify and and articulate what it is that I am that it just can feel I get it when people feel overwhelmed by the task.
I often turn to a great philosopher when these things come up. His name's Woody Allen, but I remember one of his films, he a mom is distraught because her son, played by Woody Allen in the movie, is doesn't believe in God anymore, and so she's yelling at the dad, saying, "Your son doesn't believe in God anymore. He wants to know why there's evil. Why were there Nazis?" He goes, "Why were there Nazis? I don't know how the can opener works. I don't know why there's evil." But I think some of the difficulty here too is, yeah, there's a lot of work in front of us, but also we don't want to fall into the no true Scotsman problem
Well,
here
so
with
this is where I think we
Christianity.
should go. Yeah, say more.
Yeah, because at a certain point, you have to, we've got to accept that we're part of the crooked timber of humanity, and we have to accept that. So there are a lot of Christians who do a lot to make the church look bad, and I'm one of them. I think we need to start there. Now, there are people who do a much more dramatic and spectacular job of making the church look bad. It has to be said. There are degrees here, but we all, in our unique ways, fall short. I mean, who among us is going to say, "No, of all the Christian representatives, I think I'm I think I'm pretty good. I
Yeah,
think I
I've got
can,
this.
I can stroll out there. I'm pretty confident, let him who is without sin cast the first stone." I mean, as Christians, we also have to give lip service to this fact, but do we really believe it? There was one true, authentic, perfect human being in all of human history. His name was Jesus Christ, and he's the one to whom we look. So your cheat code in these conversations is always to, first of all, to acknowledge and not try to qualify, not try to distinguish yourself, but to point to Jesus, who is himself. He's the head of the church.
So
So he's your main representative.
well said. Here's the affirmation and the pushback. Um, I was at a Q&A at some university. I can't remember what it was sometime, but this kid comes up and he was hot about something. He's like, Christians say this, but Jesus taught this, and they're not doing what Jesus said, blah, 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 and they're hypocrites for doing this because this is what Jesus said, but this is what the church is actually doing. And I said to him, wow, I said, it sounds like you have a lot of the same critiques that Jesus had with people. I mean, he looked at them and say, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and when you don't do what I say? What else do you agree with Jesus about? And he's like, oh, yeah, no, it was
How
hilarious.
dare
But
you?
how dare, but I'm saying Jesus himself had the same critique of why
Yeah.
do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do what you say? I don't know. There's never been a time in which I'm embarrassed by the church living up to the standards of Jesus. It's not where we're in conformity with the way of Christ.
Yeah.
There's nothing of that that embarrasses me. In fact, I'm proud of it. It's the places in which we deviate from it, and specifically,
Mhm.
it's the places that we deviate from it in the context in which the other listeners don't know what the standard actually is. So the difference is when this young man came up, he
Yeah.
could say, Christians are saying and doing this, but this is what Jesus said. I'm saying we're now mostly engaging with the world who don't know what Jesus originally said, don't know that that position is hypocritical to the
Yep.
life, death, resurrection, and teachings of Jesus, and just start to assume that that actually is what Christianity is. That's where I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, great. Now we've got to start way back and we have a lot of work to do. So I'm not ashamed of the gospel as it is. I am ashamed oftentimes of an overly manipulated, individualized, economized, politicized, self idolatrized, self
Right.
aggrandizing
Yeah.
vision that gets flaunted
Yeah.
out there. And that's where I'm a little bit like,
Well, that's why if you walk through with people who are so, who now the phrase being used is deconstructing, but really just calling into question usually their Christian heritage or their upbringing, you'll find that, well, this is a little different from what you've said. So you're talking about I'm talking about people with a Christian heritage there. You'll find that there are a lot of issues that can be discarded there that are just purely cultural Christianity. It's not the real stuff.
right.
And once
Yep.
they discover the real stuff, it's a very different conversation. But then there are others, Nathan, who are coming to it from a place of total and complete ignorance. I'm not using that in an insulting sense, meaning there's total biblical illiteracy. They have no familiarity with Christianity whatsoever. Somebody, I'm sure this is true of a lot of people who are born in, Portland areas or, Boston or San Francisco, some of the major, urban areas or some of the different states. This will vary by geography. So when it's somebody like that, all they have to go on is what you've just mentioned, Nathan. The headlines, the people who are publicly, representing themselves or styling themselves as Christians, often for highly manipulative purposes. Or for a long time, though, even in the 80s, in the heyday of, or the 70s and the 80s, the heyday of televangelism, this did a disservice for a lot of people because they assumed this was for many people, this is what they thought Christianity was. These
Hmm.
people who are televangelists, they thought, "Oh, well, I guess that's Christianity. Wow. That's a very
Well,
strange
okay.
religion."
Well,
Well,
let me give you a
Yep.
more on the nose version of that. You do also have in our recent political conversations of what percentage of white evangelicals voted for Trump or a Republican candidate. Okay. Those people
Mhm.
probably all have very distinct Christian convictions and beliefs than Donald Trump does. However, for everybody who
Mhm.
doesn't know that, Trump is the
Correct.
most informative theologian and representative of what
Yep.
Christian character is. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that what I'm talking about here, where we
That's
have some work
exactly
to
the
do.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that does and so there is no easy answer to that other than that we need to be ready to put in the work. Now, once again, there is a cheat code here, and the cheat code is the Sunday school answer. You want to go to Jesus, but you like Nathan said, he said, I had this whole conversation with this very open person, and I used no Christian language. Now, in my experience, those of us who live, as Christians in Christian communities, we're not unless we're in kind of sort of frontline ministry of some kind, we're not generally in the habit of speaking about Christianity in non-Christian terms or doing away with that Christian language. That does require some preparation, some practice.
And
I had
to
to
be
do the
clear, I
same.
was not being vague. I would say there's a 95% chance that that Sunday that guy visited a church. Like it was a on the nose,
Yeah.
heartfelt to I wasn't shying away from any of the truths
No,
of the gospel or who I'm just yeah.
just using plain language. So, and even those of us who like C.S. Lewis, everybody, they're always going off and, oh, we have transcendent longings. Those are really vague phrases that a lot of people, or you have some sort of, we have restless hearts. Christians use the word heart in a very unique way. It's just thinking through that and trying to translate this into plain speech, not vague speech, plain speech. I had a similar conversation also on an airplane, Nathan. Mine was with a soldier. There was a little bit more Christian furniture there, but
Mhm.
there was deep wounds and hurt because he had had friends perish on the battlefield. He had seen just horrible things. And so this was very much a
But
conversation about
the
evil.
gospel was is meant to engage reality, not
Yes,
words.
absolutely. Mhm. And I mean, again, for to an instructive example is to look at the way Jesus talks to those around him.
Mhm.
Especially, I mean, think about something like his interactions with the woman at the well, where he's very clear on. I mean, he calls out very clearly in sort of prophetic mode what she's doing. Yeah, yeah, you've had 5 husbands, and the one you have right now isn't your husband. But he's talking very clearly in terms of worship. He meets her on her own in some of her own on her own ground in certain senses, but then is ready to take her beyond it and kind of really expand her vision of what is possible. Because if you remember, that whole conversation is all about worship. Well, your people, she's a
Samaritans,
Samaritan
yeah.
woman. Two things against her right here. She's a Samaritan and she's a woman, and he's alone and a man and talking to her. So this is quite an amazing scene. That's why the apostles, by the way, are so shocked when they see him talking to her. But she says, your people say, of course, we should, worship at the temple. We have this different location, and you know, on the one hand, we could look at that and he could think, if we were in his shoes, oh gosh, where do I even start with this lady? She's all hung up on buildings and sites of worship, and we're talking about our Father in heaven and the expansive nature and of worship. It's not about buildings; it's about where our worship is directed. So, but he does that, and he walks through it with her, acknowledges some of the mental furniture that she's dealing with right there, sites of worship, the temple, or the place on on the mount that she's focused on. But then he talks to her about a day, an hour is coming and has now come when we will all peoples worship the Lord in spirit and truth. Now, there's no way she can possibly wrap her head around everything that he's saying right there and then. We have to grow. If you become
Well,
a Christian or if
yeah.
you start to follow Jesus, you grow into, yeah, being a Christian
Okay.
and taking hold of all of that. But yeah.
So let me just follow up on that point because it's in line with where I was wanted to clarify something. There is a difference between feeling frustrated with the cultural, the technological representation of your faith. There's also a sense, though, in which I think people start to feel that a little bit about their own church. And it was deeply freeing for me at the point that I recognized that all healthy churches are off balance or unbalanced. Like if you have a church where you're like, wow, everybody's got it sorted out, and we have this lined up neatly and nicely, and everybody knows what to do and how it all works, and they've been here for like that is an unhealthy church. Because the fact of the matter is like unless you're always reaching just beyond what you can actually pick up, you're not missionally engaging the world. So if you
Mm.
have all the resources but you don't have any of the chaos, you've withdrawn too far. Now, if you have all chaos and no stabilizing resources, you've gone too far in the ambiguity of your teaching. But a healthy church is always going to be right on that balance between having the right amount of stability to who they are at their core and a desire to reach really far and lift. And and once I came to recognize that a church without chaos and difficulty is an unhealthy church, that freed things up for me. And I was talking to Grandpa about this, and he's like, "Yeah," because he's like, think about how this happens. We introduce people to Christ as they become captivated with who He is and understand His promises and His calling. We baptize them, and then we expect God to change them throughout the rest of their lives. And because deep core changes and habits in the formation of who we are in our relationships take a long time to change, obviously our church is going to be packed full of people at every stage on the journey along the way there. And so if you don't have people that on one hand you're like, oh my goodness, they're crazy, what's going on here? You're probably not
Yep.
fulfilling the core of what it is that the church is supposed to be. And if you don't have some people who are like, these are solid people who've been here for 40 years and are, great pillars of the faith, you're missing something there too. But the diversity and the internal chaos is a sign of success, not a sign of brokenness. Rather, it's the other way around. So when I talk about silliness that happens under the roof of the church, I'm not meaning that locally. I'm meaning that as a more of a technological level.
I mean, Nathan, you have a household of 4 children. I have 2, so my life's not quite as interesting. But anybody who has kids knows that there is at various stages of maturity. Well, if Christianity is true, those of and we're all God's children in the church, that should give you a very vivid kind of intimation of everything Nathan just said. People in various stages. You could say this in different ways. You could pick your metaphor. You're in different places on your spiritual pilgrimage, on your journey, different stages of maturity. Yeah, and that's going to what do people the word I hear most often used to describe a home with lots of kids, whether we only have 2, but when people come over or we go over to somebody else's house, we're all right. Welcome to chaos, or you could climb into somebody's minivan. Welcome to our chaos.
Kick a spot for your feet. Yeah, that's what we say. Would we like was if somebody stops by? They've never been to our house before. We say, "Welcome to our home. It looks like this because we live here." And the same thing is
Yeah.
and the same thing is true with the church of like, "Welcome to our chaos. It looks like this because we come in all manners of brokenness and disheveledness, but we're trying to grow towards something here together, and people find a community in which we can be truly
Okay.
known and truly loved as we pursue that. That's different than um, a detached
Well, think
theoretical.
about what you
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
well, what you just said earlier. That also applies. Think about when you go into a space that looks like that's perfectly ordered.
A hotel room.
It's absolutely bright, immaculate. Nobody lives here. And what you're describing about, yeah, an unhealthy church where, you have there's a hyper focus on control and order at all costs, but the feel is that it's too immaculate. Nobody can actually live here. It's worth bearing that in mind too, because a healthy home that allows for healthy growth, people in different phases and different stages, it'll look like people live there. A healthy church, it's gonna look like people when a church is roomy enough like that, then all health breaks loose. Just kidding.
There's a way to say it. So I
Yeah.
think then, Cameron, maybe to bring us back around to we're talking about sort of where are the times in which we might cringe at the public representation of Christianity would be the times in which Christianity is used as if it's overly tidy and it has a political and powerful vision that will make all the crooked lines straight and,
A one
clarify
size fits
everything.
all kind of deal.
Oh,
Yep.
and will, well, maybe not even that, but a sense in which it brings a sense of political order and stability that the gospel was not intended to bring. Um,
Hmm.
it's being represented as something that is in a different category than where I most often see it so beautifully flourished. And maybe that's the part there that I want to recognize, is to say, from my experience, this used in this context is a wonderful thing. Also, historically, in my, and in my experience, when it's used as a um, tool for manipulation or coercion or for organization outside of the ethos, it gets back into this: if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, yet have not love, I'm a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. A sense of, if I give all that I possess to this poor and sacrifice my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. There's a sense in which there are moments in which we can begin to use the core foundational elements, and which have been great, that have sprung out of Christianity, but the political manifestations have been secondary byproducts of a culture of love and charity and grace and redemption and forgiveness and the value of the individual and so forth, that lead into this, that just have not worked well coming from the other direction down. And so it's not um actually, embarrassment isn't the right word. It's a frustration of saying, we're trying to put the cart ahead of the horse here, but a horse in front of the cart is a beautiful thing. And so that's the I think maybe um, thank you for this therapeutic conversation for me to try to kind of work through, how do I. And then there are other times in which um, somebody will do something dumb in public, and you will have to say, yes, I do largely agree with them on most of the things that, yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm not embarrassed because that's
Lots to
us.
Right. Yeah. So learning to the vital skill of distinguishing cynical uses to which Christianity is put from the genuine article, that's one task. But also then being willing in other circumstances to stand out from the culture and face being ostracized and
Mhm.
sometimes mocked or ridiculed. That also comes with the territory. That's not new to Christianity.
Public shaming is baked
Also,
right into the foundation of Christianity.
mhm,
Crucifixion is
so yep,
not for the
there you
prudish.
go. And also recognizing that we need to operate with the proper anthropology here. This is especially helpful in our conversations with other people when we talk about hypocrisy, which is very serious. We take hypocrisy very seriously, but nobody took it more seriously than our Lord. So that's a great place to go, as Nathan did in that Q&A with that disgruntled questioner, pointing out, wow, yeah, you're in profound agreement with Jesus. This people worships me with their lips, but their hearts are far away. I'm quoting Isaiah there. So all of these are helpful practices as we think through this. There's no fail-safe methodology for dealing with this when you're talking one-on-one with because persons are unique, and the circumstances and the context are going to kind of determine where that goes. But I think having those principles in mind, distinguishing true Christianity from the same cynical uses to which it's put, and also, operating with a proper anthropology, being willing to face ridicule, that's important, and always being prepared to point to Jesus. And I think the other big takeaway here is learning to speak about Christianity in plain speech, not vague, and not to deliberately obscure it or anything like that. And I mean, people vague terminology is easy to use and get away with, but to speak clearly. I think
Mhm.
those are some helpful guiding principles. At least those are some takeaways for me after this conversation. But you have been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.